The doors of the Grand Citadel burst open with a loud crash. The guards, dressed in shining silver armor, turned in shock as a tall figure strode inside. He was human, something rare on Selvaris Prime, the capital world of the Selvarian Empire. But even more shocking was what he dragged behind him. Princess Shira. Her royal garments were torn, her silver hair messy, and her violet eyes burned with rage. Shackles bound her wrists, and a thin energy chain connected them to the firm grip of her captor, Captain Elias Vance of the Terran Defense Corps. A murmur spread across the grand hall like wildfire. Nobles, warriors, and high-ranking officials gasped as they recognized the scene before them. A human had just marched into their most sacred court, dragging the heir to the throne in chains. At the end of the hall, seated on a massive golden throne, was Emperor Valix Stherian, ruler of the Selvarian Empire. His reptilian eyes narrowed, his clawed hands tightening on the armrests. The Selvarian nobles around him were speechless, their expressions shifting between outrage and disbelief. Vance stopped a few feet away from the throne. He didn't bow. He didn't kneel. Instead, he spoke in a strong, clear voice. "Your Majesty, I have come seeking justice." The silence in the room grew even heavier. One of the noble lords, a tall Selvarian with golden scales, stepped forward. His voice was sharp with fury. "Human, you dare to bring our princess in chains. You have no authority here." Vance's face remained calm. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small holodisc. He pressed a button, and a holographic display flickered to life above it. A scene played. A ruined colony, burning buildings, human bodies lying in the dirt. A desperate distress signal echoed through the hall. The Selvarian nobles recoiled in surprise. "This is Vega 4, Vance said, "a human colony on the edge of our territory. 5 million people lived there. Now, they are gone, wiped out by a bioweapon." He turned his gaze toward the Emperor, and the one who ordered it. He yanked the chain slightly, making the princess stumble forward. "Your daughter." Gasps filled the chamber. Some nobles shouted in protest. Others whispered in shock. But Princess Shira, despite her rough state, straightened her back and smiled. "You are bold, human," she said smoothly, "but foolish. You bring accusations, yet your kind are known for their lies." Vance wasn't fazed. He pressed another button on the holodisc. The recording changed. This time, it was an intercepted Selvarian military transmission. A deep, commanding voice spoke in the Selvarian tongue. "By Princess Shira's command, release the pathogen. No survivors." The voice was unmistakable. It was hers. The hall erupted in noise, some nobles shouting in disbelief, others demanding explanations. The Emperor's eyes glowed with a dangerous light, but he remained silent. Shira's smile faded. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across her face. Vance took a step forward. His voice was steady, his words chosen carefully. "Under Article 7 of the Terran-Selvarian Treaty, any war crime committed by either species can be tried in the highest court of the responsible empire." He gestured to the hall. "This court." The Emperor's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. That treaty was old, nearly forgotten, but it was still law. And now, a human was using it against them. "You cannot deny this trial," Vance said firmly. "Not even you, Emperor." The weight of the words settled over the room. The nobles, once arrogant and dismissive, now exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the ancient laws. If a formal charge was made in the royal court, even the Emperor had to abide by the verdict. Finally, the Emperor leaned forward. His deep voice echoed across the chamber. "You understand what you have done, human?" he asked. "By bringing her here, you risk war between our people." Vance met his gaze without fear. "War has already begun, Your Majesty. The moment your daughter wiped out Vega 4, she started it." The Emperor stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, a low, growling sound. "Very well," he said at last. "The trial shall proceed." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Princess Tiara's eyes widened slightly before narrowing in anger. Vance allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. The hardest part was done. The law was on his side now. But he knew this was only the beginning. This trial would not be fair. It would not be easy. The Excelvarians would do everything in their power to twist the truth, to protect their own. But humanity did not break easily, and Captain Elias Vance would make sure justice was served. The royal court of Selvarus Prime was rarely silent. It was a place of power, where nobles argued, warriors boasted, and politicians whispered in dark corners. But today, there was only silence. The accused, Princess Tiara, stood tall despite the chains around her wrists. Her violet eyes gleamed with something between amusement and contempt. She was the heir to the empire, a warrior, and a leader. She had never expected to be dragged before her father's court like a common criminal, especially not by a human. Captain Elias Vance stood firm, his stance unshaken. The weight of 1,000 stares pressed against him, but he had faced worse. He had fought in battle, seen planets burn, and watched friends die. A room full of angry aliens didn't scare him. One of the high-ranking nobles, a Selvarian with dark emerald scales, stepped forward. His voice was filled with disbelief. "Captain Vance, these are serious accusations. You claim our princess is responsible for the destruction of your colony on Vegafor. Do you have proof?" Vance didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a small holodisc from his belt and activated it. A blue light flickered in the air, and suddenly, the grand hall was filled with ghostly images of a dying world. The ruins of Vegafor appeared. Once a thriving human colony, now it was a wasteland. Buildings stood broken and burned. The bodies of men, women, and children lay scattered, their faces frozen in pain. The ground was cracked, covered in an eerie black dust, the remains of a biological weapon that had burned their lungs from the inside. The Selvarian nobles shifted uncomfortably. Even those who despised humans could not ignore the horror before them. Then the image changed. A recorded transmission played. A Selvarian commander's voice echoed through the chamber. "By Princess Tiara's command, release the pathogen. No survivors." The voice was clear. The order was undeniable. A heavy silence followed. For the first time, some of the nobles looked at Tiara with uncertainty. The accusation had been bold, but now it had proof. The emperor's claws tapped against the golden throne. His face remained unreadable. "Princess Tiara, do you deny this?" Tiara didn't flinch. Instead, she smirked. "Of course, I deny it," she said smoothly. "Do you truly believe I would give such an order? This is a fabrication, a trick by humans to shame our empire." She turned her gaze to Vance, her expression filled with mockery. "Tell me, Captain, how much did your leaders pay to create this illusion?" Vance's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to her bait. Instead, he took a step forward. This recording was taken from a captured Selvarian warship, one that attacked another human colony. Our engineers decrypted its logs. The evidence is real. A few nobles murmured among themselves. Some looked nervous. Others looked angry. But not at Tiara. At Vance. One of the generals, an older Zelvarian with battle scars along his face, growled. "Even if this evidence is real, the princess is a leader, not a soldier. It is possible that someone gave this order in her name without her knowledge. A clever excuse. One that would protect the empire's honor while shifting the blame to someone else." Vance had expected this. He pressed another button on the holodisc. The display changed again. This time, it showed a secret war meeting, a private chamber where high-ranking Selvarians spoke freely. And at the center of it all, Tiara herself. Her voice rang through the chamber. "We must remind the humans of their place. Destroy Vegafor. Make it a warning." The room erupted. Some nobles shouted in protest. Others stayed silent, eyes filled with realization. Tiara's smirk faded. Her hands curled into fists. She had not expected this. The Emperor's expression darkened. His gaze locked onto his daughter. "Sierra, is this your voice?" For the first time, she hesitated. She opened her mouth, but no clever excuse came. Vance's voice was steady. "You ordered the death of 5 million innocent people. The treaty between our people states that such crimes must be judged. You cannot ignore this, Your Majesty." The Emperor sat still. His golden eyes burned with something unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "The court will deliberate. Law will never side with a human over one of their own." A few of the nobles nodded in agreement, but Vance smiled. "I don't need them to side with me," he replied. "I just need them to obey their own laws." The Emperor studied the human carefully. There was something different about him. Most species would fear standing alone in an enemy court. Most would have given up long ago. But humans were different. They had always been different. They were relentless. Finally, the Emperor turned toward the nobles. His voice was deep, powerful, final. "The trial will continue," he declared. The nobles looked frustrated, but they could not challenge the Emperor's word. The law was clear. The trial had to proceed. Sierra's expression darkened. She was losing control. She took a step forward, her chains clinking. "You are making a mistake, father," she said coldly. The Emperor's golden eyes met hers. "No, daughter. You are the one who made a mistake." For the first time in her life, Sierra felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Vance, however, knew this was only the beginning. The nobles may have agreed to the trial, but that didn't mean they would play fair. They would find ways to delay, manipulate, and twist the truth. They would do everything possible to protect their own. Vance wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting against an entire empire. And if he wasn't careful, this trial would become his own death sentence. The royal court of Selvaris Prime was filled with tension. The nobles sat in their high seats, their golden eyes focused on the human standing before them, Captain Elias Vance. The trial had been officially accepted, but that did not mean it would be fair. Princess Sierra, standing in chains, still held her head high. Despite the evidence against her, she showed no fear. She smirked as she watched Vance. "You may have forced this trial, human," she said, her voice smooth and confident, "but you have already lost. Do you truly believe these nobles will ever judge me guilty?" Vance did not answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the faces of the Selvarian lords. Some looked angry, others uncertain. He knew the truth. This was not about guilt or innocence. It was about power, pride, and politics. The trial began. A high-ranking judge, an elder Zelvarian named Lord Serath, stepped forward. His scales were faded with age, but his eyes were sharp. He was known to be wise, but also loyal to the Empire. "Captain Vance," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "you stand before the Selvarian High Court as an accuser. You claim that Princess Sierra ordered the destruction of your colony, Vegafor. You have provided evidence. Now, you must prove beyond doubt that this evidence is real." Vance nodded. He had expected this. He pressed a button on his holodisc, and once again, the recording played. The destruction of Vegafor. The voice of its Selvarian commander. And finally, Sierra's own words. "We must remind the humans of their place. Destroy Vegafor. Make it a warning." The court watched in silence. Even those who supported Sierra could not deny that the voice sounded exactly like hers. Then the defense began. A noble stood up, Lord Velker, one of Sierra's most loyal supporters. He was tall, with dark green scales and piercing yellow eyes. "This recording means nothing," he declared. "It could have been fabricated. The humans are known for their technology. They could have altered the voice." Murmurs of agreement spread through the court. Vance had expected this argument. He did not flinch. Instead, he tapped his holodisc again. "This recording was taken from a Selvarian warship," he stated. "Your own military records confirm it. If you doubt it, I invite your best engineers to analyze the data themselves. Silence. If the Selvarians analyzed the data and found it authentic, they could no longer claim it was fake. But if they refused to analyze it, they would look like cowards. Lord Serath turned to the nobles. We will allow our engineers to study the evidence. Vance could see Shiera's jaw tighten. She had not expected the court to accept this challenge, but she did not panic. She had another plan. She turned toward the nobles and spoke with confidence. Even if this recording is real, she said, who is to say that I was not forced to give this order? Who is to say that the humans did not threaten my people, leaving me no choice? Vance narrowed his eyes. Clever. She was trying to shift the blame. Another noble, Lady Ceres, stood up. She was one of the few Zelvarians who seemed conflicted. Do you have any proof that you were threatened, Princess? She asked. Shera smirked. The humans have always been aggressive. Do you think they would show mercy if they believed us weak? More murmurs. The nobles wanted to believe her. They did not want to admit that one of their own had committed such a crime. Vance knew he had to turn the situation back in his favor. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. Enough, he said, his voice strong. You speak of threats, but it was your empire that attacked first. You call us aggressive, yet it was your soldiers who wiped out 5 million civilians. Not warriors, not soldiers, innocent people. His voice echoed through the hall. Some nobles looked away. Others clenched their fists. Vance did not stop. Tell me, Princess Kyra, he said, staring directly at her. If you were truly forced to do this, then where is the evidence? Show me the messages. Show me the threats. Show me the proof that the humans forced you. Kiara's smirk disappeared. She had no proof, because there was no threat. There was only her own ambition. The nobles waited for her answer. Seconds passed, then a minute. Shiera's fists clenched, but she said nothing. And in that silence, Vance knew he had won this round. But the trial was far from over. The nobles would not accept defeat so easily. They would find another way to protect their princess. Vance knew that this battle was not just about proving the truth. It was about surviving long enough to see justice served. Because in this court, the truth alone was not enough. And if he wasn't careful, he would not live to see the verdict. The courtroom remained silent. Kiara had failed to answer Vance's question. The nobles had seen it, the Emperor had seen it, and most importantly, Lord Serath had seen it. The trial was not over yet, but Vance had just landed a heavy blow. Even so, he knew this was far from victory. That Selvarian nobles were powerful, proud, and not above twisting the truth to protect their own. They would not accept a human standing before them, forcing them to admit their princess was guilty. And Vance could feel it in the air. They were already planning something. The Emperor studied his daughter with a cold, unreadable expression. He did not speak, but Vance noticed the subtle shift in his posture. He was thinking, calculating. Then Lord Velker stood again. His golden scales gleamed under the dim light of the court as he raised his voice. Princess Shiera has served our empire with honor. She has fought in battles, defended our borders, and strengthened our position in the galaxy. Are we to throw her away based on the words of a human? Murmurs of agreement spread through the court. Vance clenched his jaw. He had expected this. They were trying to shift the focus. This trial was about the destruction of Vega 4. But now, they were trying to make it about Xiera's past achievements. Before Vance could speak, Lord Velker continued. I propose that, before any judgment is passed, we allow the princess to prove her loyalty once more. Let her serve the Empire in battle, as she always has. Vance immediately understood what was happening. They wanted to delay the trial, to send Xiera away so that she would never have to answer for her crimes. The Emperor remained silent. His golden eyes flickered between Velker and Vance. Then he spoke. A bold suggestion. Vance could not allow this. This is not a question of her service, he said, stepping forward. This is about justice. If a warrior commits a crime, their past victories do not erase their actions. Are you saying that Selvarian Empire does not believe in accountability? The murmurs grew louder. Some nobles looked uncomfortable. Others glared at Vance. But he pressed on. If the law does not apply to your princess, then what does that say about your empire? Are you rulers or are you cowards? Silence. Even Velker did not speak immediately. He was angry, but he could not argue against this without looking weak. Shiara, however, simply smiled. She had been watching Vance carefully. "You are bold, Captain," she said, "but you are also blind. Do you think these nobles truly care about your justice?" She laughed softly and shook her head. "You fight for truth, but you are in a place where truth is only as strong as the power behind it." Vance knew she was right. He could win every argument, but that did not mean he would win the trial. The nobles did not care about truth. They cared about power, and that meant Vance had to change his approach. He turned away from Xiara and looked directly at the Emperor. "Your Majesty," he said, "this trial is about more than one crime. It is about your empire's future." The court listened. Vance continued, his voice firm. "The Terran Alliance will not stand by if this injustice is ignored. If this trial is dismissed, it will be seen as an act of war. And war with humanity is something even your empire cannot afford." The weight of his words filled the air like a storm. The Emperor remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. "You threaten us?" His voice was calm, dangerously calm. Vance met his gaze without flinching. "No, Your Majesty, I am warning you." The Emperor studied him for a moment longer. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his throne. "The trial will continue." The nobles looked shocked. Lord Velker clenched his fists, his tail twitching in frustration. Shiara's smile faded slightly. The Emperor's decision was final. There would be no delays, no escape. But Vance was not naive. This was far from over. The Selvarian nobles would not accept this outcome quietly, and Vance had just made himself their #1 enemy. As the trial moved forward, he knew the real fight was just beginning. Because now, the nobles wouldn't just try to defeat him in court. They would try to eliminate him. Captain Elias Vance knew he had made enemies. The trial had not ended, but he had forced the Emperor to continue it, despite the nobles' protests. That meant trouble. As he walked through the dimly lit corridors of the Selvarian palace, he kept his hand close to his weapon. He was not a fool. The nobles would not wait for the trial to remove him. They would try to end him before he could present more evidence. And he was right. He sensed the attack before it happened. A faint shift in the air, the softest whisper of movement. Vance ducked just as a blade sliced through the air where his neck had been. The assassin, a Selvarian warrior dressed in dark armor, hissed in frustration. They had missed, but they were not alone. Vance rolled forward, pulling out his plasma pistol just as 2 more figures emerged from the shadows. 3 against 1. The odds were bad, but Vance had survived worse. The first assassin lunged again, but Vance was faster. He fired. A sharp cry echoed through the hallway as the assassin fell, their armor sparking from the blast. The second and third assassins attacked together, one with a blade, the other with a shock gauntlet. Vance sidestepped, barely avoiding the electrified strike. The blade slashed across his arm, cutting through his uniform. Pain flared, but he didn't stop moving. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it sharply. A sickening crack followed as the Selvarian dropped their weapon with a howl. The final assassin hesitated, but only for a second. That second was all Vance needed. He fired again, hitting the third attacker in the chest. They collapsed instantly. The injured one tried to escape, but Vance kicked their fallen weapon away and grabbed them by the collar. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The assassin spat at his feet. "You are already dead, human. You just don't know it yet." Vance clenched his jaw. He had expected no answer, but now he had confirmation. The nobles were done playing fair. They were ready to kill to protect Sierra. Vance knocked the assassin unconscious and stepped back, breathing heavily. He was bleeding, but he was alive. He had to move fast. If they had already sent assassins, then he didn't have much time before they tried something even worse. The secret alliance. Vance knew he needed allies. The Selverian nobles were against him, and he could not trust anyone inside the palace. But there were some who might be willing to listen. He made his way through the palace, avoiding patrols, until he reached a small chamber deep inside the royal halls. Waiting inside was Lady Cirrus. She was one of the few nobles who had not openly sided with Sierra, and more importantly, she had asked questions during the trial. That meant she was at least willing to think for herself. Cirrus looked up as Vance entered. Her golden eyes flickered to his injured arm, then back to his face. "You were attacked," she said. Vance nodded. "And that means I'm getting close to the truth." She sighed. "You are a fool for thinking this trial would ever be fair." "Maybe," Vance admitted, "but I don't need fairness. I just need the truth." Cirrus hesitated. Then she asked, "What do you want from me?" "Help me expose Sierra." She laughed softly. "And what makes you think I would betray my own people for a human?" Vance didn't smile. He looked at her seriously. "Because you know what she did was wrong." Cirrus met his gaze, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she sighed. "I cannot openly support you, but I may know something that could help." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Sierra did not act alone. There are others who helped her plan the attack on Vega 4. Powerful people. If you can expose them, the nobles may turn on her to protect themselves." Vance's mind raced. This was the break he needed. "Who are they?" he asked. Cirrus shook her head. "I don't know their names, but there is a record, a secret communication log between Sierra and her allies. If you find it, you will have undeniable proof." Vance clenched his fists. That was it. That was what he needed to end this. "Where is it?" he asked. Cirrus hesitated. "It is hidden in the royal archives. But be careful, Captain. If you go after it, they will know, and they will do anything to stop you." Vance took a deep breath. "Then I better move fast. The final move begins." Vance left the chamber with a new plan. He could not wait for the trial to reach a fair conclusion, because it never would. The nobles were corrupt. The court was against him. And now, they were trying to kill him. But if he could get to the secret communication log, he would have undeniable proof that Sierra had ordered the destruction of Vega 4. And that proof would force the Emperor's hand. But getting to the archives would not be easy. He would have to break in, bypass Selverian security, and escape before he was caught. It was a suicide mission. But Vance had come too far to stop now. He had one night to prepare. Tomorrow, he would make his move. And by the end of it, Sierra would either face justice, or he would be dead. Captain Elias Vance stood in the shadows, his heart steady but his mind sharp. The royal archives lay ahead, the key to ending this trial. If he could retrieve the secret communication log, he would have undeniable proof that Sierra had ordered the destruction of Vega 4. But the Selverian palace was not unguarded. 2 heavily armed guards stood at the entrance, their golden armor gleaming under the dim lights. Beyond them, security drones hovered silently, scanning for intruders. Vance had one chance to get inside undetected. He moved fast. A small distraction grenade rolled across the floor, stopping a few feet away from the guards. Hiss, bang, a burst of light, and smoke filled the corridor. The guards instantly turned, weapons raised. Vance sprinted forward, silent as a shadow. Before the smoke cleared, he had already slipped past them, entering the archive chamber. The truth in the darkness. Inside, rows of holographic data cubes stretched across the room. The security systems were complex, but Vance had studied them. He moved quickly, searching for the restricted files. A hidden data terminal blinked at the far end of the room. Vance reached it and inserted a hacking module. Lines of alien code flickered on the screen. He navigated through them with expert precision, bypassing security locks one by one. Then, he found it. The secret messages. Vance downloaded the files, his hand steady despite the weight of what he was holding. This was it. Shiara's own words confirming her involvement in the destruction of Vega 4. Her messages to high-ranking nobles, discussing their plan to cover it up. Everything. Vance clenched his fists. This was more than just evidence. This was the end of her lies. But before he could move, a voice rang out. "You should have stayed in your place, Captain." Vance spun around, pistol raised. Shiara stood in the doorway. A dangerous confrontation. She was not alone. 4 elite guards stood behind her, weapons ready. But Shiara was calm. Too calm. She took a slow step forward, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. "Did you really think you would walk out of here alive? Asterisk, 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 asterisk. You think these files will change anything?" Vance did not lower his weapon. The truth always changes things. Shiara laughed softly. "No, Captain. Power changes things." She signaled her guards. "Kill him." The guards moved. But Vance was faster. He fired, hitting the first guard square in the chest. They collapsed, armor sparking. The second lunged, but Vance rolled aside, grabbing a fallen plasma blade. With a sharp swing, he cut through the soldier's weapon arm. The remaining 2 fired, but Vance had already ducked behind a console. The room erupted in sparks as plasma blasts struck the walls. Shiara watched, unimpressed. "You're only delaying the inevitable, Captain." Vance ignored her. He grabbed a stun grenade from his belt, his last one. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it. Boom! The room flashed white. The guards staggered, momentarily blinded. Vance moved in. 2 precise shots. Both guards fell. Now, only Shiara remained. The final battle. Shiara smiled. Impressive. She drew her blade. It hummed with crackling energy, its curved edge gleaming dangerously. "But you are not walking out of here, Captain." Vance braced himself. Shiara attacked first. Her strikes were fast and precise. A single mistake would be fatal. Vance dodged, barely avoiding the deadly swings. He countered, striking at her open side. Slash. She parried effortlessly, forcing him back. "You fight well, for a human," she said, "but you lack our speed, our strength." Vance narrowed his eyes. "Maybe. But humans don't need to be the strongest. We just need to be the smartest." Before Shiara could respond, Vance fired his hidden wrist blaster. A direct hit, to her leg. She staggered, her balance faltering. Vance didn't waste time. With one final strike, he disarmed her, sending her blade flying across the room. She fell to one knee, breathing heavily. For the first time, Shiara looked uncertain. Vance raised his pistol. "It's over. Justice at last." The trial chamber was silent. Vance stood before the court, the stolen files displayed on a massive holographic screen. The nobles watched in shock as Shiara's crimes were revealed. Her orders to attack Vega 4. Her messages to powerful nobles, planning the cover-up. Her own words, damning her. Shiara stood in chains, her expression cold but unreadable. The Emperor's golden eyes flickered as he watched the recordings. Then he spoke. "Shiara, do you deny these charges?" She said nothing. For the first time in her life, she had no words. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then, in a voice that echoed across the chamber, he declared, "The princess is guilty. The law must be followed. She will face judgment." The nobles whispered in shock, but none dared to oppose the Emperor's ruling. Vance exhaled slowly. It was over. Justice had won. Epilogue: A Human's Victory. Vance stood at the docking bay, watching the stars. Lady Cirrus approached him. "You survived." He smirked. "Wasn't easy." She nodded. "You changed things today, Captain. You proved that humans are not weak, that we will not be ignored." Vance looked toward his ship. "We don't start fights, but we always finish them." Cirrus smiled. "Safe travels, Captain." Vance stepped onto his ship, the engines roaring to life. As he took off, leaving the Tselvarian homeworld behind, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Humanity would never be underestimated again.